Howdy there folks, it is once again that time of the month where we take a look at the most recent Project Zomboid development blog known as the Thursdoid. As of the 27th of June, a new post has been dropped, and this one is a mixed bag of some newer stuff, ongoing improvements, and a roundup of where the team are at currently. In this video, I'll do my best to summarize what you need to know, as throw in my own speculation and thoughts here and there. It's actually my birthday as I'm working on this, so never say I don't do anything for you, you little rascals you, and if you're listening to this thinking, oh man, that sucks that he has to work on his birthday, just remember, I'm having copious amounts of drink tonight to celebrate being 1 year closer to the sweet release of death. Anyway, like and subscribe and all that, I guess. Let's get into it. So I'm going to turn this Thursdoid on its head a bit and start with the stuff further along in the blog post this time around, because that's where we see some of the new stuff. Then I'll come back to the roundup of where the team is at right now with some of the crafting systems for Build 42, since we've heard a lot about that in recent months. Let's start with some map design work. Now, in last month's Thursdoid, you might remember seeing some work in progress images that took this school in Muldraw and upgraded it to this. It's fair to say this was a huge overhaul for the building and is just part of ongoing work to redesign a huge portion of the existing vanilla map with new towns, bigger buildings in cities, and some underground locations on top of all the renovation work that's going on. Now, in this dev blog, the developers note that while the response was largely positive from this glow up in the last Thursdoid, some players shared their feedback that the building looked a little too fancy pants for Muldraw, which has historically been a very grounded town with realistic appearances. As such, the developers have taken things a slightly different direction as a result of this feedback, giving us this as the new school building. Interested to hear your thoughts on this one, but I can see why the developers feel the need to make this a bit more suited to the setting. The devs then quickly follow this by reassuring us that other areas will still get similar treatment to that of which we saw in the last dev blog, such as this brand new image showing a before and after comparison of the LSU library in Louisville. I know I've said this before when covering previous parts of this map-wide revamp we're seeing, but I think this will have a much bigger effect than people think, and there's likely a whole bunch of things we won't get to see until the update actually drops, which means new experiences, new buildings to explore, and entirely new layouts for ones we know and love. Also, dear lord, that library is going to be an absolute gold mine now when it comes to skill books and magazines, with them adding so many extra floors. Next up, we've got some more images and videos from the ongoing work being done with the in-game lighting in Project Zomboid. The devs note here that there's still a fair amount of work to do, which will likely occur during the unstable beta for Build 42, but that they're closer to the atmosphere they wanted to achieve when first announcing the light propagation system planned for Build 42. In the footage we're given, you'll notice that the street lights are more of an orange hue than you might be used to. This was a design choice rooted in reality, with the writer of this dev blog stating that back in the 90s, street lamps like these would use sodium, resulting in that orange hazy light. Plain neon lights will appear white, halogen lights will be slightly yellow in tint, and as such, you end up with a much more varied environment, which can be quite nice to look at as it turns out. The team then goes on to mention that light overlays can be created and values can be adjusted for items like signs, crafting stations, and fridges. I'd imagine this essentially means that some lighting can be made more prominent than others, which results in images like this one, where the pink from the neon sign visibly lights up the hood of the vehicle over the nearby street lighting. Pretty neat, really. Okay, so this next part of the dev blog is a pretty big one, and I know it's going to be music to the ears of anyone that likes to play a more wilderness survival kind of playstyle, or just likes to live out in the middle of nowhere. We're on to biomes and foraging in this next section. So if you weren't aware already, Build 42 is going to do away with the black borders of the map we're used to and replace them with randomly generated wilderness areas. The trouble with this approach was that up until now, foraging zones have been marked out manually, and that would leave huge areas of the map borders that wouldn't work when it comes to foraging. We're actually shown an image from the devs here that shows just how blocky the foraging zones are as a result of this method, and that's without mentioning the big zone at the top right that hasn't actually been set up for foraging yet. To resolve this issue, the devs have been working on a system that will automatically designate foraging zones, as well as extras such as which ambient sound effects to play in those areas. We're shown another image which, when compared to the old one, you can see how big of a a difference this is going to make. Foraging zones are much more natural, being defined less as big squares and more with rougher edges, outcroppings, and varied areas of forest rather than just one large space of a singular biome. The devs have also been diversifying the types of forest biomes we can expect to see, with 9 biomes in total. These include, and I'm quoting from the blog here, deep forest, organic forest, birch forest, pine forest, farm-maintained forest, pH-resistant forest, and 3 more which are mixes of the above. The generation of these biomes are guided by geographical features like rivers, roads, neighboring farms, and large bodies of water, according to the developers. All of this is apparently now in the internal test build, with work now ongoing towards making modders' lives easier with cleaner transitions between generated areas and handmade ones. So, last bit of new stuff before we get into the crafting recap. If you've ever played multiplayer in Project Zomboid before, you've likely seen some weird interactions with zombie pathing and movement, where the zombies sort of hitch a bit and lag during their movement around another survivor. The team have been working on fixing these issues with a quick video demonstration in this dev blog of some before and after shots. It's safe to say things do look smoother in the after footage, which could make a huge impact on multiplayer servers after B42 comes along. Alright, so that brings us to the biggest part of this dev blog, and that's the crafting recap. Now, as a reminder, the devs are essentially cutting down what's coming out in the first iteration of Build 42 so that they can get the update out the door in a more reasonable time frame. The rest will be added later as part of updates during the unstable version and beyond. For a first release, the team are hoping to have these main items finished off and ready to go, that being metal smelting and blacksmithing, pottery, weapon-related carpentry skills such as carving handles and shafts for crafted weapons, small-scale bone carving to create sewing needles, fish hooks, cutlery, and materials for some armor, the essentials when it comes to agricultural production like flour, oil, thread, and twine, and lastly, weapon crafting performed on in-game surfaces that don't necessarily require a particular workstation. The team then note that not all of these aforementioned features will come with 100% precise animations at first, and direct character interaction with larger crafting workstations will rely on the grapple tech that we saw in the last dev blog, which will therefore be mixed in later down the line. I'm unsure whether that means the crafting benches themselves will be delayed, or whether this just means we'll be able to use them, but that animations won't be added in until later. I'm hoping it's the latter, because the former would be a bit disappointing. Crafting that's being brought in during the unstable build, that's after we initially get our hands on Build 42, will include brewing, glassmaking, and butchery. Bowery will be at the back of the queue according to the devs on account of needing far more work in terms of animations, tech, combat, and design. This will likely appear in a later version, the devs say. So to those looking for archery, we're going to have to wait a little longer for that, it seems. Several decorative craftable building items will enter the mix for unstable, as the team believe they have a great art pipeline running at the moment, so churning out these items is relatively easy. Once all of this comes to public beta, there is apparently going to be a guide for modders, since a lot of this stuff is going to change. Now, I don't know much about modding, but I'd assume that's good news for those of you out there that do operate in this field, with how much of a sweeping change this is going to be for the crafting systems you've been working on so far. Some extra manpower has been brought into the mix from TEA Games, who are assisting the team with polish and fixes in the realms of various new crafting systems right now. Lastly, we get a good look at a new, more refined UI that will be used for crafting on a surface, whether that be a table, a worktop, or an exposed tree stump, just as a couple of examples for you. The team notes this is a work in progress, and it will become more refined over time. So that's all for this Thursdoid, but I did just want to tack something onto the end of this one which I think is worth talking about, because I know people are going to bring it up themselves. In the last Thursdoid, the writer said the following in regards to the decision to scale back the initial version of the crafting system. Quote, "The unstable build is not imminent, but with this readjustment of our plans, the pile of stuff that needs to be done before release has gotten a lot shorter. How quickly we'll get the build ship shape remains to be seen. It will take some time to settle, but we'll likely have a much better picture by the time the blog rolls around. Now, granted, this is some quite vague wording, but I interpreted this as them essentially saying, we'll have a rough time frame for you by the next Thursdays. However, there was no reference to this at all in the blog post. As many of you have probably already heard, there's been a bit of controversy recently around Lemmy's response to pressure from the community about build 42, and it wouldn't surprise me if, as a result of this, they've just decided to keep quiet for the time being and work towards the update without giving any further estimates or guesses as to when we might see B42, which I think is absolutely the best way to go forward, but they've also once again said one thing and done another without any sort of announcement on social platforms at all. This is actually getting to be a bit of a pain point for me, if I'm being honest, and I do think it's important that I'm honest with you guys about my thoughts. I'll wait as long as it takes for build 42. We've got a great game already, and I'm very happy, but I really don't think the team are making it easier on themselves by making rogue promises like this and then just not fulfilling them. This is only going to confuse the situation and frustrate people more. Anyway, this is just my 2 cents, and I'm sure you guys have your own thoughts on this, so feel free to let me know down in the comments section. I'd like to say a very special thank you before I wrap this one up to all of my Patreon supporters. Some of you have already seen, but we're actually hosting a Last of Us wipe on our server this month, so if you're interested, you can join for £3 a month, which we put towards mods and our own maps via the link in the description. Thanks folks, I will see you all in the next one.